for taking the time to join us this morning on Gaming Morning Show and give us some insight into this piece that you wrote. Let's start off with just kind of the idea. I mentioned it. There's more content available to download. Internet speeds typically are faster. So what is the concern primarily for retailers?
Yeah, I think the concern for retailers is generally the same concern that retailers, in every space are having, right? Is that so much is moving to e-commerce. Sort of, what do we do? The idea, I was sort of looking specifically at GameStop, right? They were going to report their earnings. That's one of the things that we do on Marketplace is sort of look and anticipate what these companies are going to be doing. They should theoretically be sort of a boon right now because a lot of people are staying at home. A lot of people, obviously are playing games with that time spent at home. At the same time, they've been sort of faltering and sort of trying to figure it out. And so what I was looking into was specifically the idea of if you're just downloading games, are you thinking about going to a retailer? Are you thinking about sort of the community that has been built up? And that's the idea, right? Is that GameStop, I talked to a really, really smart, actually video game professor, Joost van Dreunen at NYU was awesome. I mean, the idea that he was a professor of video games was the coolest thing in the world. He told me sort of the idea was GameStop has this really, really great connection with the manufacturers, right? They have connections with Nintendo where you sort of discount those products to get people into your store. So Nintendo loves you, and Microsoft probably loves you, right? Because you're sort of that community, you're that entity through which people sort of engage with the product. The problem now is if you don't have to do that, then are you going to do that? And that's sort of that's the conundrum between retailers is, look, we've established that we need foot traffic. We need you in the store to sell our things. Are you going to come here if we can just do it at home, right?
Yeah, and as that model changes and what has worked before for like a GameStop and selling games back and buying used games, and as those no longer work, what are some of the solutions we're seeing for retailers and other reasons they may have to be optimistic for the future of retail?
I don't know that there's a whole lot to be optimistic about, to be honest with you. I think the shift is going to have to be sort of engaging technology. I think they're still going to have to lean on the manufacturers. I think as long as there's an optical drive, there's room for a place like GameStop, right? So it's not going to be in the next couple of years. It's going to be in the next 10, 20 years that you might see sort of that wholesale transition. There's still sort of again, that relationship with the manufacturers, as long as you can sort of lean on that, if you're a place like GameStop, if you're a retailer, I think you're sort of still viable. But what you need to be thinking about is instead of sort of shunning that, people downloading games, things like that, I think you need to embrace it. And I think from what I'm understanding and from what I'm hearing, GameStop specifically has been pretty reticent to do that. They're sort of thinking, you know what, people are still going to come into the store. They want to be around other people that want to discuss video games and want to sort of engage with the product there in real time. And I think to some extent that's true, but you're living in an era, pre-Twitch, right? You're not sort of thinking about what's happening right now. If I can download a game and start playing with you guys right now, I'm not going to go out to my GameStop and try to figure out who else is playing this game. I'm just going to do it on my online community, right? So I think that's the thing. There's been this reticence to sort of embrace the future because the past has worked for you. And that's, again, what we're seeing in retail so much is this reticence to sort of embrace the reality of the situation. It might not be your model, but that means you have to shift your model. That means you have to change what you're doing. And retailers are going to have to do that.
Andy Uhler, our guest on Gaming Morning Show from Marketplace. You can catch it on public radio. You kind of, I suspect, don't maybe get to talk about everything that you want to within the piece that actually gets aired on, say, Marketplace Morning Report. What else did you learn or were you interested about after doing this story?
Oh, you mean when I interview people for half an hour and I get to spend 1 minute telling the story? You know what was really, really interesting? Again, something I mentioned earlier. I didn't realize sort of how close of a relationship, because I think of Nintendo and I think of PlayStation. I think of sort of Xbox as their own things. I didn't realize how close of a relationship they had with retailers. I mean, I guess it makes sense, right? That's where you're selling your product. but I guess I didn't realize that there was actually sort of a leverage point where the retailer could be like, no, we're going to sell our game at this price. You're just going to have to accept that that's the revenue you have coming back. I didn't realize it. And there was a great analogy, again, that Ben Dronin made for me. I'm in my late 30s, and he started talking about Tower Records, right? And I couldn't use this analogy because I didn't have time for it. But he was sort of equating the idea of GameStop with record stores, and not record stores. I still go to record stores to buy physical LPs because that again has become sort of a thing and sort of a retro thing. He's talking about sort of when you went to the store and you would go to a listening station and you would listen to CDs. That was what he was sort of equating GameStop with, and I thought that was a really nice analogy for me anyway, where it was like you went to embrace with sort of engage with the product, right? And so it was sort of like testing it before you buy it. And I didn't really necessarily think about that because, again, like you guys were talking about, there is a little bit of equity, right? If you buy a game for $60, you can probably sell it back to GameStop for $20. And so there's a little bit. I talked to another person who equated it with buying a car. I think that's maybe a stretch because, obviously the investment is a lot larger. At the same time, you do sort of maybe think about equity when you're buying games. You're thinking, I'm going to play this for a couple of years, and then there's this retailer that's going to take it back and give me a little bit of money back, and I'm probably going to reinvest. And that's the model, right? They think you're going to reinvest that into another game, which you're probably going to do. But that analogy of sort of being a part of a community, because I mean, when I was a kid, I went to record stores all the time, again, just to hang out and just to listen to things that I thought cool people were listening to. And that was sort of the idea, I think, behind GameStop as a community. I didn't know necessarily, I didn't have a good analogy, and then that dude came up with it for me, and I was just like, oh man, this is awesome, and then I didn't get to use it for the story. Of course.
Well, yeah, and that's what I was saying. I'm actually happy I got to ask you that question then, because there always seems to be more in the background. And I'll be interested to see how like retailers step up that experience to try to make it a little bit more luxurious feeling to draw people into the store. I would be remiss, because we love reading Twitter bios, and we read yours, and you said something to the effect of, I love to talk sports when I get a chance. And today, sports are great. Sports are awesome because the Broncos won yesterday. Your Cowboys won yesterday, too. I imagine today is a good day in the sports realm.
Today is, so as a Cowboys fan, we're in a really tough spot, right? Because I'm spending all yesterday thinking about draft picks. And I'm thinking what we need to do is lose to the terrible Cincinnati Bengals so that we can secure a top 5 draft pick. Of course we win, because we're not even good at being bad. The Dallas Cowboys aren't even good at being bad. Like, my cousins and I are on a group chat, and I have 37 first cousins. It's crazy. And we all grew up in Dallas-Fort Worth, and so reluctantly Cowboys fans. I mean, it's like being a Yankees fan if you're not from New York. I would not sort of bestow this anchor upon anybody because I grew up there. That's, I have to be a Cowboys fan. No, you're right. It should theoretically be a happy day, but when your quarterback goes down, in the first few games, and you have this just massive contract to a running back who may or may not be good anymore, you're sort of, me anyway, I'm thinking about it like a dynasty fantasy football team, right? It's like, oh my God, I need to just sell all of my assets, get as many draft picks as I can, and maybe in 3 years we're going to be decent.
Mavericks season's right around the corner.
It's true. Luka. They do a great. It's so funny because I had a story about about NBA contracts and the CBA, the collective bargaining agreement, and I sent Mark Cuban an email. And he is delightfully, twice now, he has replied to my emails. I don't want to talk about that, but he replied to the emails, which is great, And so it's so funny because I even typed to him. I was like, I'm a huge Mavs fan, and he said, well, whenever you're in town next, you should come to a game. So I'm like, Mark Cuban is inviting me to a game because I'm doing this story about the CBA that's probably going to paint him in a bad light. It was pretty cool. No, you're right. It's so funny because we have our hierarchy, right? It's Cowboys, Rangers, Mavs, Stars in my brain anyway. But now I'm sort of having to invert them because the Stars were pretty good last year and the year before last. And the Mavs, I think the Mavs have incredible promise. So I am sort of like, I'm evaluating my allegiances to sports right now.
Did it feel good to get to talk about sports for a little bit?
Oh my God, are you kidding me? Whenever they let me guest host, I actually book sports cues because that's what I love to do, and that's also what I feel like I know a decent amount about. And what's funny is the argument that I have with folks all the time with sort of the higher ups is I genuinely don't think that public radio and sports are mutually exclusive. I think that people who listen to public radio, I think for the most part, I mean, I'm a good example. My brother's a good example. I think those people sort of exist. It's not just nerds on their calculators listening to All Things Considered, right? It's people who play fantasy football who care what their running back did last night that are tuning in and listening to stories about the future of retail and video games. I hope, I don't know.
Well, I certainly fit that, so I'll give you some sort of affirmation that you're not far off for sure. Andy Uhler, thanks so much for joining us. You can check out Andy and Marketplace on public radio. I listen on NPR Now on Sirius XM around 3 o'clock Pacific time. Andy, thanks so much for taking time for our show. We really appreciate it.
You got it. It was so much fun. I will do it anytime you guys want me to. I'll even, if you guys want to play a game, we'll make it happen.
Ooh, I love that idea. Guests, games with guests. I love it. Thanks, Andy, so much.